Hello, everyone. Welcome to Thirsty Thursday, our little wine meditation for the week. I hope you're all doing okay out there, and I can't thank you enough for continuing to join us for these little respites from real life. So today's tasting is pretty special to me for a couple of reasons. For one, we just finished bottling the 2018 red wines for Chimney Rock. And that is our 35th vintage. So we just ended about an hour ago. And that's always such a joyful moment for a winemaker because it's like your kids graduating from college, sort of. You know, they're kind of ready to go out into the world and make you proud. So vintage 18 is in the bottle. Now we'll let it age for a little while before it gets released. But it's a beautiful, just beguiling vintage. I'm really excited about it. So I'm celebrating that, and nothing better than 3 glasses of wine to celebrate that with. In addition, the block we're talking about, so we're going to be tasting Alpine Vineyard today. That is one of 2 hillside Cabernets that we make at Chimney Rock, and it's at the southern end of our estate. It's a 2.5-acre block. Was planted in 1994, and my nickname for this block is it's a little piece of Bordeaux at Chimney Rock, and I'll tell you why I say that. It's probably one of the cooler spots, even though it's a hillside and it's got a fair amount of exposure. It has kind of an unusual aspect. It almost angles, so part of it sort of faces northwest and part of it sort of faces southwest, and it's a little uneven. It's quite rocky up there. So the top part of the block, really shallow soils, very steep, vines are very stressed. The bottom, you maybe get a little bit of loamy. So a little diversity within the block, and I've often been known to pick the block in 2 picks. So there's 2 bottom rows that are a little bit more vigorous, and I often pick that separately and at a different time, and then the top part of the block I pick earlier. So it's one of the first blocks to ripen here during harvest, and it always, whether it's a cool vintage or a warm vintage, and we're going to taste 3 warm vintages today, 14, 15, and 16, it always shows a little bit of cool climate character, especially in relation to the rest of the blocks. Now, when it comes to comparing great wine regions of the world to each other, I'm not really a big fan of that. I think it's sort of silly to compare Bordeaux to Napa or South Africa, only because I think it's like apples and oranges, right? Our soils here are very different, our climate is very different. But I think what's important in thinking about other wine regions is how they can inspire you. And so Bordeaux to me was the catalyst to me falling in love with wine. I was living in New York right after college, and I had a really good friend from college whose father had collected Bordeaux's in the 70s. And I tried some pretty amazing, and now I call them life-changing bottles, because it was the first time I really started to think of wine as this very sort of complex, artistic, amazing creation. Something clicked for me in some of those first great Bordeaux's that I tasted. We tasted some great stuff, some Mouton Rothschild, some Lafite, some Latour, a little bit of Figeac, and suddenly I wasn't applying to medical school. I was instead applying to graduate school at UC Davis to become a winemaker. So Bordeaux kind of transformed my life. So when I found a block here at Chimney Rock that spoke to me in that way, and what do I mean by cool climate? I mean it has, so to me Napa Valley Cabernets can be very flush, very opulent, very bright. This one's always a little bit more guarded. Has a little bit of austerity. It's a little bit quieter, but it has a lot to say still. And I think what's really interesting, and we'll go through it as we taste these, the aromatics. I mean, you're going to find things that sort of remind me of wines from Pauillac or from the Medoc, things like pencil shadings, maybe a little hint of tobacco, just something that's not just pure fruit, but has a little je ne sais quoi of like cool climate. So with that, let's start talking about the vintages first. I want to tell you guys about the 3 different vintages, and they're fairly similar, but not completely. So 14 was a drought year. We had a very dry, warm winter, early bud break, bloom weather. So when the grapevines flower was sort of very even keeled, and we had a really nice crop set. Not a lot, not too much, not too little. Pretty non-eventful until August 24th. We had a little earthquake in Napa. I don't know if you guys remember, about a 6.0. And we were lucky enough not to have any damage here, but it definitely shook the valley, and it's one of those memorable events. So we start off with an earthquake, and then we start harvesting Merlot on September 4th. First Cabernet comes in September 19th, and the first Cabernet was actually Alpine. So Alpine 14 was harvested on September 19th. It was a nice sort of even keel vintage once we started picking. Didn't really have heat spikes, very sort of balanced, warm but not too warm. 15, drought year again. So this is the third sequential drought year that Napa Valley had, 13, 14, 15. In 15, we actually had quite a bit of rain at bloom, really kind of lousy weather when the grapevines were flowering. Actually knocked off about a third of the crop. So much smaller crop and much warmer year. That year we actually did contend with some heat spikes. So several days of 100 plus weather in September and probably in August as well. But the wines, boy, they have a lot of fruit in 15. And we set a record on harvest here. We finished harvesting all of Cabernet here at Chimney Rock in 15 on September 29th, which is unheard of. Typically the Cabernet harvest happens in October. So Alpine that year was harvested on September 14th. So that's usually when I'm picking Merlot, not Cab, but it came in that early. And then we go to 16. So 16 is a little bit more of a typical, I would say, warm harvest, but with balanced rainfall in the winter. So we're kind of sort of coming out our way out of a drought. And so almost close to average rainfall in the winter. So the soils were replete with water, and the vines were not quite as stressed as they were in 14, 15. Veraison went a little later. We had a good crop set, not big, not small, just sort of average, and no heat spikes again. So heat spikes are an interesting topic, I think, in Napa Valley winemaking, because they can become a challenge to us because they may cause sugars to spike, while your tannins maybe aren't quite ripe yet, right? So it's something that we have to balance. So 14 and 16, absent of heat spikes. 15 had some heat spikes. All warm vintages. I would say normal rainfall for 16. So let's start by tasting, and I'm going to talk about each wine and what I think the differences are right now, and how these wines I think will evolve. So starting with the 14, right away I get that little hint of tobacco, kind of sagey. I've used this term before. It's forest floor, which is almost like you're walking in a forest and what it smells like, sort of the ground cover. And definitely some beautiful black fruit, which is typical, I think, of a warm year. But what I love about this vineyard is even in a warm year, it's never just pure jam like Napa Cabs can be. It's always got all these different hints of other things. Little floral and taste. So that is a 6-year-old Cabernet, and I think it still has quite a bit of time to go. I think it shows what I describe as kind of an austere nature to it. It's not, it's not super plush and easy drinking. It's got structure in a way that makes you kind of stop and go, oh, this is serious structure. But it's also still approachable, just like Stag's Leap is. It definitely calls, I think, for something to eat, because it is 100% Cabernet from this block. Nothing else is blended in there. So we made a whopping, just to give you an idea of how small the production out of this is, 168 cases came off of that block in 2014. So, any questions yet about 14s?
There's a general question from Linda when you were talking about the vintages. During drought years, do you irrigate the vines?
Yes, we do. We are allowed to irrigate in Napa Valley precisely because we don't get a lot of summer rain. And we practice what I call deficit irrigation, which is keeping the vines relatively stressed. So I would say we irrigate minimally. You're not irrigating to keep the plant super green and lush. Because you want the plant to focus its attention on berries and not on the green part of the plant, it's really important to kind of keep that vine at a certain level of stress in terms of water. And so we do a lot of things to kind of measure the stress level in plants. We look at things called leaf water potentials and soil moistures and all this data that helps us guide exactly how stressed the plants are. Now, in a drought year, Mother Nature's kind of doing what we would normally try to make the plant do in a wetter year. So drought years are naturally fairly good for wine production, for Cabernet, for especially high end, because you're getting smaller berries, you're getting more concentration, more color, all of that. Okay.
Awesome. And then we have lots of people who are tasting along with us, and one person is drinking the 2015 White Pebble, so comparing, that, and then also a question from Carl to describe the taste that you're getting off of the 14.
Okay, so describe the taste.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So on the palate, I think, again, this is a fairly structured wine. It's got quite a bit of tannin still and has time to age. It's a little bit fleshy, like an Napa Cab, but not like super, opulent. So I think it's, as I said, like a little bit shy almost. And I actually think these wines, and I didn't decant them today, but this particular block can benefit from decanting. It just kind of opens it up. And I'm not a proponent of decanting everything. I'm very purposeful in which wines I decide to decant or not. But because I think young Bordeaux's I would decant because they tend to be a little what I call tight, so they just need to open up. And I think the 14 is that. But just now, even in my glass, it's starting to kind of soften up. And remember, when you pour wine in a glass, you're kind of decanting, right? So again, lots of plum too. A bit of cocoa powder, a little bit from the oak maybe. So I think with that, I'm going to start talking about the 15. We'll kind of move along, and then you guys can ask questions as we go, but any sort of general questions we can maybe leave for the end. And by the way, tasting a vertical is one of my favorite journeys because it really shows you that Mother Nature doesn't repeat itself. This is the exact same block over fairly similar vintages in some ways in terms of weather. Even my picking dates were similar, but the wines are remarkably different. And I think that is, to me, what makes wine magical, that it doesn't, it never repeats itself. It's like your thumbprint. It's never duplicated. And every vintage is interesting and unique. And to taste that piece of land in 3 different years sequentially, I think really shows that in such a beautiful way. So we're going to go on to the 15. So 15, again, not a big crop, very small. We lost 1/3 of the crop at bloom, so really warm vintage. We were done in September 29th. This came in, what day did I harvest this one? I'm going to tell you. September 15th. So actually a day after the 14th, which is interesting. So right about the same harvest date. Now, I think I see a difference in color. 15 had really deep purple color, and I think it's stronger in terms of color than either the 14 or the 16. So a little bit better anthocyanin. Anthocyanin is the pigment in the grape. So this, to me, of the three wines, is the jammiest. It reminds me more of a typical Napa Cab, or a Stag Seed Cab, and I see a little bit less of the herbal tone that I see in the 14. I think the 14 has a little bit more of that sage forest floor. But in this one, what I get more is almost like a pencil shaving kind of character, which I think is reminiscent to me of Bordeaux. And it's really like blackberry jam, a little bit of tobacco, maybe I could be convinced. But what would be remarkable would be to taste this against, say, our Clone 7 or against Ganymede, some of the riper spots on the estate, because then you really kind of see the subtlety of that. This is a cooler spot. All right, so on the palate, I also find that this one still has the tightest tannins. 14 and 16 are a little bit more approachable today, and that maybe bodes for, I think, its ageability. That may kick around a few more years, and all of these wines, by the way, are wines that you can cellar for 25 to 30 years if you want. Especially this one. And I think it really opens up with some time. But I think this is a really pretty wine. The fruit is just really, really just pure. There's a purity of fruit to the 15 that's a little bit different for me. And again, 15 is super warm, but I think it still shows kind of the character of that vineyard. It's a little shy. It doesn't come out and hug you. It's just sort of reserved. Any questions you want to?
Mm-hmm. We have a couple questions that we'll save for the general portion, but Daniel's asking, are they all intentionally, do they have the same ABV? Intentionally, for him, the 15 has a bit more alcohol on the nose.
Yeah, 14.5, so there's a little bit of the rule on what you label your alcohol. There's a little bit of looseness, and a lot of times, before your final blend is made, you're submitting alcohols for the labels. So we find it easy to put 14.5 on our label, and ours tend to all fall around there. But I'm going to say that our range of alcohol on these wines is usually like 14.2 to maybe 14.8. And I would agree with you. I think the 15 is a little bit higher. It might have been like a 14.8. So it's just for the purpose of uniformity, and it makes printing a lot easier. All right, with that, I'm gonna start to smell the 16. Okay, so 16, to me, it's just super layered. And this one really, because it is, although it's a warm year, it's a little bit cooler than the two prior years, I think you really start to see more of those characters that I was talking about. So kind of pencil shaving, tobacco, it's a little bit more present, almost like a hint of mint. There's another descriptor that I like to use, which is kind of like wet stone or like wet gravel. So think about like what gravel smells like right after it's rained. And it's kind of, on a hot day, you can kind of smell that. I get a little bit of that, and I think we get that character from cooler climate Cabernet often. The fruit character here is a little bit different to me than the 15. The 15 is more black fruit, and this one has more of a red fruit, more cherry and plum. A little bit of cocoa powder again. Again, a little bit of like sage character. very thought-provoking nose, the 16 to me. I just lose myself in this glass. Anyway, let's taste. And I'm going to predict that this is not as austere as the 15. It's going to be much more approachable. And it really is a little less shy than the 14 and the 15, a little bit more generous. I think berry size was probably a little bit bigger because you don't have the drought years. And so that makes the wines often a little bit less tannic, a little bit more approachable at a younger age. But still, you know, has structure, definitely has some of those cool climate characteristics. And I think you can really follow the theme on these wines. And if I were to say there's one that is a little bit of an outlier, I think it's that 15 vintage. It was just so warm. I think it's unusually jammy for what this vineyard normally does, but it still has, you know, if you look there closely, it really still has a little bit of mint, almost like a menthol kind of character there. Interesting. So somebody was asking about the 15 White Pebble compared to Alpine, super different. Particularly because White Pebble was a fairly young block at that stage. That block was planted in 2002, so 13 years old. Same clone 15 as well, but also not a hillside. So I would say White Pebble is not as austere, much easier, friendlier, you know, and approachable, I think, at a younger age. So I think White Pebble is particularly in contrast to this, super, super different. And it's at a warmer part of the ranch, so it's kind of midway. So already you're starting to get some reflective heat from the Palisades and a little bit more warm climate characteristics as well. So those are our 3 vintages. What do you guys think about this vertical?
Everyone's loving it. We have a number of questions just in general about the 3. But the comments about the wines are that they're all super distinct vintages, despite them all being drought years. But they all have, you know, their own unique personality. Brian's asking what the 15 and 16 production size was.
What the 15 and 16 production of this particular block?
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, 14 was 168 cases. 15, interestingly, we got 217, so we actually had better yield on that block. And the 16 was 167. However, interestingly, that doesn't correlate to the entire ranch. I know for a fact that we harvested a lot less fruit in 15. But berry size-wise, the 15 was definitely the smallest berry. That's an interesting thing we keep track of, harvest to harvest, is looking at exactly what the average berry weight and cluster weight is, because that tells us, it's an indication of what kind of concentration you're going to get. And the 15, I know there's a reason for that deeper color, and part of that was the berry weight.
And Daniel Olson is celebrating the vertical with his friend Trevor, and they've asked several great questions, 2 of which we haven't answered are the soil type for the vineyard, and then the cooperage for each of the vintages. Are they the same?
Yep. Okay, so soil type up there is mostly rocky. I mean, it's really shallow soils, old volcanic soils. So super stressed, you know, great little hillside for Cabernet. The barrel types, I've used for this wine around 60% new French oak, so all French. And I tend to stay on the lower side. I mean, I think a lot of people with a hillside may put 100% new oak, you know, because it can handle it. But I really want to show the subtlety of those kind of cool climate characteristics. And I think if you tone down the oak, you kind of let those things really be highlighted. So about 60% of, and usually about the same coopers mix that I do here. This is not a lot of barrels, obviously, 160 cases. So usually I'm using a cooper named Picard for this particular block. And that's been kind of my life's journey, trying to fine-tune which barrels go with which vineyards best. And I think we kind of have Alpine dialed in. So.
A question from Scott earlier in the tasting. What are some food pairings that you would recommend for each of the wines, either individually or as a group?
What are some food pairings? You know, I would say that the food pairings for these wines would be very similar because there really is a theme here. And the austerity of the tannins in these wines and the leanness makes me want sort of, and I know I hate to be kind of cliche, but I want sort of a fattier piece of meat to kind of balance out some of that tannin. So something like, more like a ribeye that really has something to grab onto that tannin. If you wanted to go with a vegetarian dish, you know, you could even do something like a steaky portobello mushroom risotto, and I think that would be really good because you get kind of that creaminess of the risotto and sort of the earthiness of the mushroom, and I think that would work really well too. Ooh, that made me hungry.
Question from Michelle. Why is the Alpine Vineyard more of a challenge? Is it more work to produce the wine overall?
Why is it more of a challenge to produce? Well, it's a hillside. Hillsides are always harder. They're harder to pick. And this particular block, I think, is tricky because it's a little bit uneven. So the bottom part of the hill is a little bit more vigorous, and so it's not that it's harder, but it takes more time and thought in terms of like, okay, maybe we'll be more aggressive and pull leaves on the bottom 2 rows, or like the 10 southernmost vines in every row are a little more vigorous, so we sometimes do different things. So you're really kind of doing what I call precision viticulture. You're going into that block and saying, how am I going to make this entire block be perfect? And you have to do different things in different corners. And my vineyard team loves me with this block because I'm like, oh yeah, you're gonna pick those 10 vines separate, and then I want these over here. But that's what it takes, I think, to make wines that are precise and consistent. You know, you really have to think about those details.
Mm-hmm. A follow-up question about the barrels from Brian, the barrel toasting.
Yeah, I am a medium plus kind of gal. That's kind of my happy region. Medium to medium plus. I don't like high toasted barrels. I think the wines of Stag's Leap of this area tend to be a little bit delicate, and I don't want to kill it with too much high tone oak. And medium to me is just kind of the right place for the wines. So that's kind of our house signature.
And Dan is lucky enough to have a few bottles of the inaugural 2001 vintage,
Excellent.
As well as the 2004. He's asking, is it time to polish them off?
2001, you know, Dan, I have not had that one in a while. I would love to get my hands on a bottle of that. I don't even know if I have any. I think the 01s I think they're young wines. I do. I think you can hold on to it for another 5 years, but again, Dan, it's your personal taste, right? What are you looking for in age? Are you really looking for these wines to get super smooth and those secondary and tertiary aromas, or do you like some of the freshness of the fruit? If you do, okay, the 01's 19 years old, maybe you should drink it. So I think it just really is again, a personal decision on when the prime time to drink a wine is.
Mm-hmm. And so we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions if anyone has anything else that we haven't answered. But in the meantime, Rich asked if you could talk about our winery being open.
Oh, absolutely. So we are open. We opened last weekend, right? Or was it 2 weekends ago? 2 weekends ago. Things are a little different, so you must make a reservation. This is very important, guys. Please call. We can only take groups of 6 people, and we're limiting the number of people that are on property at any given time to keep both employees and our guests safe, and we want you guys to have a great experience. Most of our experiences are now seated tastings outside. We're not doing seated tastings or bar tastings. We are doing our single vineyard odyssey, but there's a limit of how many people we can take on that, obviously. And those are kind of the two experiences we have currently. But really key to make a reservation if you can in advance. And some things are different. You're going to have to wear a mask. We ask that you wear a mask, and there's hand sanitizer everywhere, and we're just taking all the precautions to make sure you have a safe and wonderful visit here. But we are open Monday through Sunday, 10 to 5. So we look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, and so I think our last two things is we've had people ask about the Alpine that's available now in the tasting room, and Terry, our wine club manager, let us know that we only have 3 cases left of the 14.
Okay.
And then Brian's asking if the Alpine, any of it makes it into the SLD can.
Never, rarely. Maybe it has happened that I declassify sometimes the 2 bottom rows if they don't quite match the rest of the block. So sometimes that may go into the SLD, but not really. Alpine's one block that's so small, it's 2.5 acres. Usually it goes into Alpine. And what's available in the tasting room, we're down to the last 2 cases of 14, is that what you said? 3 cases. And then I believe we have some 15 and 16 still. So yeah, it's still available.
Yeah, and then as far as when folks can see us again, we'll take a little bit of time off leading up to the 4th of July, and then we'll be back in July.
Yeah, so we're going to take a little time off through the 4th of July week. I always take a little vacation after bottling because I need it. And then we will be back in July with, we have some really fun tastings planned. So you can count on us being back in July and August again. So with that, I want to raise a glass. And again, I was talking about my fondness of Bordeaux, and there's two reasons. One is my father. My father loves a good bottle of Bordeaux. He still raves about 2 bottles of 1945 Mouton Rothschild that he once had the pleasure of owning. And so I want to raise a glass to my dad. Happy Father's Day, Dad. And I want to raise a glass to Mr. Tony Trelato, who in some ways has been a winemaking dad for me, and his love of wine happened through Bordeaux as well. So this is a little toast to the 2 of them and all the great fathers out there. Happy Father's Day. I hope you've got some great wines to drink this weekend. Cheers.